Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. As firefighters and first responders, we train endlessly to tackle fires, rescue victims, and manage crises as they unfold before us. But there's another force we face at almost every single emergency scene, and that's people. The way a crowd behaves in a fire, a disaster, or a large-scale emergency can be just as unpredictable and dangerous as the incident itself. This is where social psychology, specifically the study of crowd behaviour, becomes absolutely crucial. Understanding how people react under stress, why panic spreads, and how individuals behave differently in a group can mean the difference between chaos and control. Why do some crowds freeze in fear while others stampede? Why do bystanders hesitate to act in emergencies? And can we, as first responders, influence the crowd's behaviours to ensure safety and swift evacuations where needed? By delving in and studying social psychology, we gain insights into mass panic, herd mentality, and even the bystander effect. The more we understand human behaviour in crisis situations, the better we can prevent stampedes, communicate more effectively, and ultimately save more lives. So today, in my conversation, I have the privilege of speaking with social psychologist Anne Templeton as we explore the fascinating role of social psychology in emergency response. We discuss the critical importance of trust, how it shapes public cooperation, emergency management, and effective communication, and shares some fascinating and valuable insights on how first responders can build trust by working with communities and clearly explaining the reasoning behind the emergency guidance. We also dive into the role of technology in crisis communication, the resilience of public in emergencies, and the balance between professional response and public assistance. One of the key overarching principles of our discussion is the power of language. How messaging and the way instructions are framed can significantly influence public behaviour during high stress situations, drawing so many lessons from things such as COVID-19, the Manchester Arena bombings, and highlights the importance of clear, timely, and accurate communication in reducing confusion and ensuring public safety. This conversation sheds a lot of light on how understanding crowd behaviour and effective communication can seriously improve our emergency response and save lives. So let's get in there with Anne Templeton, and I'll see you on the other side. When you're speaking to people about what you do, how do you describe it? What is social psychology for people that are completely unfamiliar with it?
That's a great question. I mean, social psychology is a huge research area. What I specifically try to focus on is group relations and how group dynamics affect our perceptions and behaviour, and specifically looking at crowd behaviour and how group relations affect crowd behaviour. So I try to understand how and why people behave in crowds, and how, if we can understand how and why they're behaving in those ways, how we can use that to facilitate safety across a range of contexts, so emergencies or organised events.
There is something really weird about, I was actually speaking about this today. I was in a course and we were talking about culture, we were talking about bullying and harassment, we were talking about appropriate things, inappropriate things. And one of the examples we were given is around this, I think I termed it dissipation of responsibility, and I'm probably getting tripped up in my own words there. But the old saying, two's company, three's a crowd. When do you consider it to be a crowd? And when do you think that behaviour starts to change? Because there is a really strange thing. It's a bit like hecklers when in a crowd, a thing, isn't it? Like, you wouldn't say that if it was just you and me sat here like this. It's very direct. And equally, taking responsibility for something when something's going wrong, with this past when do you consider it a group, and when does that shift start to happen, do you think?
It's a great question. And you know what, I've been asked, when does a group of people become a crowd? Like, what's the kind of magic number? For me, honestly, I don't know what the magic number is. For me, it's more about the psychological bonds that are between the people in that group or crowd. So if you can have what we call in crowd psychology a physical crowd, that is a bunch of people who happen to be there at the same time, in the same place, but they're not really connected to each other, right? They might have their friends or their family groups, but they're not really connected to each other. Then we have psychological crowds, and that is where people feel like they're a part of the same group, feel connected. And it's those group relations, those feeling connected with each other, that you start to see the most social influence. That's where people start to influence each other more.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Renowned for innovation, quality and reliability, Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show. So that's like the one we're talking about shared values. So I would use examples of like a football team, shared theoretical values, a shared passion, a shared cause versus victims of a terrorist attack where it's almost, mind you, I was going to say it's almost blind luck. You're in this, excuse me, you're in the same place. But there's a Simon Sinek talk when he goes, you see, so if I met Anne on the street in London and she said, hi, I've never met you before. Pete, there's a great restaurant just down the road. You should go there. It's amazing. I'd be like, who the frick is this crazy ass woman? You know, I don't even know her. But if I met you in Africa and everyone around me speaking African, or I don't know, that sounds culturally wrong. I don't know. They do speak African, right? I don't know. Anyway, speaking different languages. Yeah, probably a bad example. We're in France, and they're all speaking French. And I'm like, I hear you speaking behind me. I'm like, hey, are you from the UK? And you're like, yeah. And all of a sudden, we're best friends. And you go, hey, you should go to this restaurant. I'm going to go because someone with a shared value, with a shared context from me, has given me advice on something. But it's like that bit, isn't it? At what point, like if you were on holiday and you saw someone that was also an Arsenal supporter, a Liverpool supporter, you'd be like, we're the same person. But, you know, if you saw them in the street, not necessarily the case. It's a weird thing that we see. They're like signposts or like signals, aren't they? Like when someone gets a tattoo or someone's wearing a green hat, or you also have the thing that shows you're like me.
I think you're absolutely right. It's an indicator of commonality, and whether that is common values, common interests, or common experience, that really brings people together. So you mentioned, you know, people who've experienced a terrorist attack or people who are attending a football match, for example. They're both really good examples of where you can get commonality. So you might have, like, thinking of the London bomb as the example, there's been a bunch of research done on this. So you know what the London Tube is like. People do not speak to each other, right? You actively avoid eye contact. You just want to get a seat. You want to get to your destination. Definitely not a psychological crowd. That's a physical crowd. No connection. But when the bombs went off, people reported coming together, feeling part of the same group because they had the common experience. They had common fate. They felt like they were facing the same danger. That brought them together in that common experience. Look at football fans, or another example you mentioned of if you're abroad and you meet someone who's speaking the same language as you, the same nationality. It's a commonality. There's an indicator of kind of group membership. And we generally are more likely to trust people who we feel like are part of the same social group as us, because we think, well, we've got a commonality with them. There's already a kind of emotional closeness. But we also believe that they're likely to be working in our best interests. They're probably doing something that's like good for the group, therefore it's good for us. Or we just have higher trust in them because we think they're going to treat us well and act in our interests.
I love that. Now, I know today we're going to speak about some great examples. You've done a whole bunch of awesome studies, and we'll actually put some links for people to go and delve into some of the group dynamics around some of the incidents that we're speaking about, many of them emergency services context, but also there's some great stuff you've done around sports stadiums and crowd behaviour, because so much of this has, you know, it correlates, it sort of bleeds over into so many different benefits, because we're talking about, like, say, human psychology, we're talking about behavioural dynamics, all of these things, people everywhere. But one thing that I wanted to think about for a second there was when we're speaking about people that we identify with and people that we associate with, has that changed when you look back over, and I know it's not something we're necessarily going to speak about, but like, has that changed with the growth of technology? Because I think too, like, we've never been as connected as we are now, but a lot of people feel very isolated. And like you gave the example of the tube there. We're on the tube, everyone's on their phones all the time, and we seem so much more isolated. And like your next door neighbours, people don't know their next door neighbours anymore, you know, because we just can live independent lives. I'm wondering if that's had any sort of great effect on things.
It's a great question. This isn't really my research area in terms of the effect of technology on that kind of connectivity amongst people. But something I think is really interesting for emergency contexts is people will use social media to communicate and to find out information about what's going on. And you see, like during COVID, a colleague of mine, he gave a great example of where he set up a WhatsApp group for everyone on his street. So they could communicate if they needed anything, if they needed deliveries, things like that, that wasn't there before. So it can be used as a tool for connecting with people. Same with like Facebook groups for residents associations, or, just people in the same building, having that kind of common space for communication. In some ways, I think that social media or mobile messaging applications, I guess they would be called, I don't know, they're providing an alternative space for that community. So I hear what you're saying. If people are sort of just on their phone playing games and ignoring each other, they're not communicating. But it depends what you're using. It's a tool, and it depends what you're using it for.
Yeah, I think societally we feel like people are more alone, but as a lot of your research shows, when something tragic happens, it kind of fortifies and brings everybody together because of, again, that aspect of common cause. A lot of what we were speaking about before we started today was built around trust factors. So there'll be many, many emergency services out there, and also people that own large buildings, people that own venues and things like this. They have their risk assessments, and there's always the what if, and the emergency services forms part of the what if. Talk to me a little bit around trust factors in terms of compliance, in terms of authenticity, in terms of who it's coming from, how it's heard, how it's interpreted, and what kind of affects its success, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. For me, trust is a really central component in emergency management that I think if you talk to practitioners, if you talk to firefighters, they know that. They know that public trust in an organisation is important. But it's interesting to see that it's only quite recently it started to make it into emergency management kind of guidance and policy. So when I talk about trust, it's interesting. So I think trust comes from many different things. On one hand, we're more likely to trust people who are part of a group. But when you look at emergency services, you wouldn't necessarily say that a firefighter is part of the same group, right? They're a kind of distinct, trusted organisation. And I say trusted organisation there because I think public perception of the organisation is really important in how likely we are to listen to what they're saying and follow their guidance. So if you research I did with residents of high-rise residential buildings, one day I'll find a shorter way to say that statement. But when I was doing interviews with them, it's really interesting because they would say that they, for example, wouldn't trust a landlord or managing agent if they had negative relations with them before, if they had negative experience with them beforehand. They wouldn't trust the guidance, fire safety guidance. They might not even attend to it because they had negative relations beforehand. But if it was coming from a firefighter, apart from the fact that they're an authority on this issue, because they're trusted, they feel like, well, they're acting in my best interest. They're doing this to help the public. They're helping me. I trust them. So it's not just the expertise, although that is important. It's this idea of, well, they're working on my behalf. They have my interest at heart.
What's in it for them? What's their motivation? And I suppose, like you say, I always say that firefighters is one, and I want to ask you about police officers as well in a minute. Like, firefighters hopefully are seen as someone with a good moral compass, but when I was brought up, I saw police officers, and still do in the same capacity. But you're right, like, if a police officer knocked on my door now, firstly it'd interrupt our conversation, but I'd wonder why. Yeah. I'd have a mixed percentage in my body of, I'm predominantly be thinking, is it a bad thing? I think the higher percentage is, have I done something wrong? Yeah. I think, because I just wouldn't expect them. And I always think we do have a USP in that respect with firefighting. They say about we can get over the threshold better than most, and we have a real USP for that because there's nothing in it for us financially. Like I say, if the guidance comes from the owner of the building, or what's the motivation? Do they care about me? Do they just care about their rent? They charge me to live here. There's all of those negative connotations that come from it, isn't it? As opposed to this individual just has the best interest in mind, potentially. So
you touched on 2 points that I think are really important there. And one is the kind of perception of different emergency services and public trust in them. So I think generally if you're talking about fire and rescue services, ambulance services, they're seen as being there to help the public, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily the case for the police. And there was one participant that took part in the interviews had not had the best of experience with the police, and actually said they would be worried about opening the door if someone was knocking on it, if it was a firefighter knocking on the door, in case it was the police, because they didn't feel, they were worried about them, didn't feel they were acting on their behalf. So that's one thing that feeds into trust. Another thing, just talking about, getting the guidance, fire safety guidance from, say, landlord, managing agent, or from a firefighter. It's interesting because, the landlord and managing agent, they aren't really making the fire safety guidance, right? That they're informed. But because of who it's coming from, people aren't necessarily paying attention to or trusting the guidance. I remember one participant said that they know the guidance is black and white, right? They know it's subjective. But because of who it was coming from, they just didn't feel like they could trust it, because they felt like that.
It's the whole message versus the messenger,
Exactly.
Isn't it, that aspect of it?
But interestingly, there's been really great work done by formerly Public Health England. It's Dr. Holly Carter. It's now the UK Health Security Agency. Okay. She did excellent work during her PhD on CBRNE decontaminations, where she looked at how the information that you give people about how to undergo the decontamination changes how quickly they go through the decontamination, how effectively they go through the decontamination process, and also how they feel in terms of well-being. And so she kind of discovered there are a few important principles for communicating that make the person giving the communication seem more legitimate and feel like more part of the same group with them. So explaining, for example, what was happening, what kind of behaviour was particularly needed from people undergoing the decontamination, why it was needed. So looking at the health benefits was really important as well. So I think it's that knowing what information to give people to help build that trust is so important. There's been other research that's shown, making sure that you say who the guidance is coming from, particularly if it's from a trusted source. Saying when the actual action is needed, for example, giving repeated updates. Again, Holly's work said that. Just keeping people informed, keeping that communication helps to build those relationships. It helps to build confidence in the guidance that's been given.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Because I suppose in the absence of any communication, the natural pessimist within us fills the void with worst case scenarios. I think so. I was reading a thing on evolution the other day, and they said most of us are pessimists because the pessimist survived. The optimist was like, oh no, I'm sure it's not a lion, and then they died. I'm sure it's not something that's going to hurt me. And so we're naturally ingrained, our DNA is to be the pessimist. So if you don't give people the context of the why, then it's just to tell, isn't it? It's just a what. It's just to do this, do that, void of... It's no different than your kids. The kids' standard response is why, because they want context. If they can understand, they're more likely for compliance.
But that's exactly it. People want to know what's going on. They want to know why they're being asked to do a certain thing, why it's the right thing to do. That helps build confidence in the guidance. But it's also, if you don't give people that information, and there used to be quite a lot of fear of giving people information in case they'd overreact, that is not empirically based. But now, I think more and more the research is showing if you don't give people the information, they will look for it elsewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Be part of the narrative, because people will just go on Google and find the thing themselves. It's a bit like doctors when they tried to, with the greatest respect, not give the full details because they don't want to panic someone. Someone will just go self-diagnose on Google and go, is it this? And they'll go, just stop looking. Just tell me then. Tell me what you know.
Exactly. And people are going to seek the information elsewhere, right? And if people don't have the full picture of what's happening, how are they able to kind of make decisions about what's the best thing to do if they don't have the full picture? But also this idea of panic, it's really not evidence-based. I think, I'm not saying people never panic, but I think it's incredibly rare, and we need to dissect the idea of what panic is. I think panic is often associated with this idea of like an irrational response. But again and again, over quite a few decades now, we've looked at crowd behaviour. People don't overreact. Sometimes they'll underreact. They'll delay evacuation, for example, while they're trying to find out what's going on and whether they need to respond.
Did you ever see that video where there's a group in the room and smoke starts coming under a door? I think like the 10 of them, or I don't know, so there's like 12 people in the room, 10 of them are actors or something. And the person running the lecture is like, hey guys, I'm just going to sort something out. Stay here and then we'll start when we get back. And I think a smoke alarm starts beeping and they see what reacts and stuff like that. And then smoke starts coming under the back door of the room. Yeah. And one or two of the people are saying we should leave. One or two are saying, no, it's fine. It's just to see how that group dynamic unfolds. And like you say,
social influence. Yeah.
Social influence. Yeah. And I find stuff like that so fascinating. There's other ones where like, which line is longer, and like they'll ask the entire group, and like some people can be really swayed at being like, oh yeah that one, and it's such a clear thing, it's not like a numerical thing where the person might be dyscalculic or whatever. It's like it's a serious, really obvious thing, but we can be so heavily influenced, can't we?
Social pressure, it can be really strong, but I think that's even more of an argument of why it's important to give people all the information that they accurately and possibly can, so that people are able to make informed decisions. In saying that, there have been many times where the public haven't had information in emergencies, whether the emergency services haven't arrived yet, their phone signal's gone down because of the emergency, whatever it is, and they've been incredibly resilient, organising response amongst themselves. Look at Manchester Arena attack, for example. Yeah. People acted fantastically. They were really trying to support each other. There were people helping, like, try to gather kids together and look after them, trying to apply first aid, giving emotional support, practical support. And we see this across a range of emergencies. This is really common. And so you see that there's the public want to help. They are incredibly resilient. So for me, it's about giving them the resources and giving them information so that they're able to do that.
I think of defibs as one great example, but also there's a lot of tourniquet packs that have started emerging across the UK as another example. Like make it not idiot proof, that's harsh, but like make it simple, make it available, give people the education, give people the awareness and the appropriateness about how to use it. It is incredible how resilient some people can be at different nations or at kind of different levels, I think, of sort of societal independence or that member of the public, their own resiliency and their capability. Where do you think that line fit? And again, I know this isn't your area of expertise, but like, where do you think that line should finish in terms of what should be expected of them? Because when the emergency services turn up, do people naturally just think that we should run everything, we should take care of everything? But also, you don't want all the public ripping open the lockers and starting getting to work, because we have had that before, where good intentioned members of the public will try and grab hose and they'll try and run it in one direction, and they're just trying to help, really get guys and girls trying to do the right thing. It's a difficult line to draw, I suppose.
It is a difficult line to draw, because although the public can be incredibly resilient if they have the resources and information, and sometimes when they have very few resources, they're very resourceful in finding resources. You don't want everything to rely on the public. You need to support the public. And I know that this is something, when I spoke with firefighters in the UK and also ambulance services in the UK, it's something they're increasingly wrangling with, because I think there's quite a widespread acknowledgement now that the public want to help, but within the kind of operational guidance, within the training, the public are the guidance is keep the public back, let them, let us deal with our kind of operations. I've heard great stories of where the public...
I think the ambulance is slightly different with that, though. I think because often, like, a paramedic working alone will turn up. Like my brother-in-law is a paramedic, is a senior paramedic, and he rides by himself. He'll turn up and he will say, "Can you just do this? Yeah. Can you just hold that? Yeah. Can you read this out for me? Can you get that out of my bag for me?" And people, it always reminds me of the the comedy joke about the aeroplanes, where if you're sat in the middle aisle and they're like, right, if you're in the middle, be familiar with how the door opens, and people are like, I'm not part of the goddamn crew, I'm not the evacuation
The
team.
reason I say that I think emergency services are kind of wrangling with this is because the public do want to help and they acknowledge they want to help. The guidance, particularly for firefighters, kind of, keep the sterile area. But then, exactly as you say, we'll go with ambulance services, for example, they'll kind of negotiate what tasks the public can help with. And so in interviews I conducted, it'll be, they don't want to give too complex a task because they're worried about kind of overwhelming that member of the public, and also they're ultimately responsible. That member of the emergency service is ultimately responsible, and there's a lot of kind of accountability with that. But they find ways that the public can help. So whether it's holding someone's head, for example, whether it's, okay, can you pass me that red bag or that green bag, or the pouch in this particular bag. So they'll find kind of ways that the public can help. But even with that, it's quite small tasks, and it's not so much in the training. It's stuff they kind of learn on the job, and it's something they're still wrangling with, because, for example, how do you know what member of the public, what skills they might have, how they can be particularly useful. Often even firefighters will sometimes give people particular tasks, like, hey, can you help me keep these people back, for example.
You see, it's great with kids if they're upset about something. It's like, all right, could you put your hand on there? Can you hold this? And it kind of centers them. I always think that about first responders. Someone said to me about bravery and about like, I don't know how you just go into those things. And I'm like, it's not really the same thing, because we've actually got a job to do. So it's not like we are, like, a member of the public as almost a bystander, observing the entire thing, almost like they're behind a screen, because they're not actively involved in it, and they're not actively think they're part of the solution. So I think it is more traumatic for them because they don't have a purpose. But if you give them that education and direction and almost their ability to assist and empower them with something, they feel like they are being part of the solution, perhaps. I've
heard quite a few people in emergency services talking about accommodating the public need to help. So there's acknowledgement that the public want to help. There's they're wrangling with how much the public can be involved and who to involve, because ultimately they're accountable. They're worried about overwhelming the public, even though the public can be incredibly resilient, as we covered. One thing that came up in the interviews, and I don't have experience with this, so I can't say, but this is what the participants kind of told me, is that one of the ways they accommodate that public wanting to help is by giving small tasks that help them feel like they're part of the response, and they'll even thank them afterwards and be like, that was really helpful, thank you, really helped us with this, and that provides a reassurance. I think efficacy in emergencies, feeling the efficacy, like you are able to have an impact, you're able to kind of take a certain amount of control, is really important for well-being. And providing, I think, feeling like you've helped can be really reassuring for after the emergency as well, thinking that you were a part of it.
Feeling helpless is horrible for people, isn't it? Feeling like I felt like I was just in the way.
Yeah.
I felt like I was just making it worse. Everyone seemed so busy and so useful and so purposeful, and I was just in the way. I was part of the problem.
So people feel like they were able to help and they could have done stuff, but weren't allowed to or weren't able to in that particular situation. That also feels horrible, right? And so this is something I think emergency services are wrangling with more and more. I'm currently working on a series of experiments where we try to alter the wording that a firefighter is using when giving evacuation instructions from a building. And one of the ways we alter it is we try to use quite collective language. So We'll say, for example, work together with us and do this particular thing. So it's the idea of getting that kind of like teamwork. So not only we're part of the same team, the connotations of trust there, but also trying to make it feel like people are a little bit part of the response. And the idea for this actually came from when I was speaking to fire and rescue services and ambulance services about how they communicate with the public. Three kind of main categories came up that I thought were really interesting. One was quite a directive approach, quite like get out now, abrupt. They felt like
we're very command and control based is the problem, and that doesn't land very well with a lot of people.
But when time is tight, they feel like it's needed, right? Because they need to get onto the next person, need to get onto the next door or whatever. But They feel like it has a negative consequence. That's one of the conditions we try to use in these experiments.
MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture, and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. That's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. That incorporates the M1S CBA, which is the tried and tested BA set. Everybody uses it in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Then they combine that with the Luna module, which is a wireless all-in-one device, creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. Honestly, the edge detection element of it, go and check it out. Honestly, go and have a look on their website. Edge detection, it looks like the Matrix. It's absolutely awesome. In terms of an enhancement tool for search and rescue, it's literally unrivaled. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake.
The other is what we've called the facilitative approach. And I've been trying to work out the best word for this for like a year, and I'm still stuck on it. But the facilitative approach is this idea of, can you do this for me? So like, can you go that way for me? I need you to do this for me. So it's very much like for me, it's that kind of personal, reciprocal kind of idea. And that is really common, particularly actually for both fire and rescue services and ambulance services. In their kind of terminology, it'll be like, can you pass that? Can you do this for me? It would help me if you did this. So it's the me, it's very personal. The other approach, and this is rarer because it's more time consuming, was that kind of collective language. So let's talk about what we're going to do here. So taking someone away from building to the bottom of the garden, need information from them about what's going on inside of the building or where something is in the building, saying, let's talk about what we're going to do here. And I remember from a social psychology perspective going, we, what is this? What is this collective language?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to...
Because that might have, like you say, it's an interesting experiment, because the over-index on that, someone might go, have you not got a plan? You should know.
Yeah.
What's this we? I've not got additional interesting ideas to add to this. Haven't you been doing it for years?
Well, there is an expectation that they'll know what they're doing, right? But in these experiments, we give them clear directions to say, like, this is what's happening, but it's like, we need you to work together with us and do this action. So they're still directing it, but it's using that collective terminology.
I feel like that. So there's a few things I want to hear when I'm talking there. So that facilitative approach, I use that with my teams. Like, even though I'm not theoretically, even though I'm your manager or whatever it might be, this could just be an order, but I'm not going to do that because it's not sustainable. It's not, it's going to stop happening as soon as I'm not here. I really need you to do this for me. Do you know what I mean? We've got this going on today. I know you've got a real passion for this, or you're arguably probably the most knowledgeable on this. I need you to do this for me. Something I could probably do myself, not because I'm amazing, just if I had to, but they probably could do it better. But it's that active, it's the we, it's the going, the way of doing something together. That example you gave of what we're going to do here, we have these, local resilience forums. Have you come across them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes great examples where you want to tip your hat to the capability, the the knowledge and the experience and the value that these other organizations can bring.
100%.
But they may not be the lead organization in this scenario. Like if it's a police-led incident, like a marauding terrorist police-led incident, we'll support. But we might need something from the local. We need people evacuating from a certain area. We need something else setting up. There's other stuff to be done. And the way that's communicated, like I say, if it's just ordered by the police or just if it's a fire-led incident, we're just pointing at people and telling them to do stuff, it can really devalue a wonderfully resilient, effective resource that you have.
I think working, particularly if you're looking at larger scale emergencies, we really have to kind of involve the community. It's so important to know who the kind of leaders in that community are, who's trusted in that community, who's listened to, look at what kind of existing structures there already are within the community for support, and work with them. Otherwise, there's a risk that you're kind of coming in from the outside, steamrolling in, and you have a community who's like, well, actually, we're already part of a group and we have these resources. Why aren't you listening to us? That can be a clash. So I think having links with the community and having those kind of trusted messengers is really important. And actually, I came across this it was the NFCC operational guidance. Remember, it was just one line that was like a recommendation was use a trusted messenger. And I was like, I think they actually said trusted in-group messenger. And in-group is a very social psychology term. And I was like, this is interesting, but who is that? Because I think it's not always who we assume. Often, fire and rescue.
It's not always a positional thing, is it? I talk about cultural architects, and I say that with groups as well, because it's rarely ever the positional organizational lead. It's someone that's got authenticity within that culture, just maybe has several touch points for a variety of reasons. They're dependable.
With the community.
That's the person you want to make your best friend. Yeah. Exactly
that. So I think knowing who's trusted, who's influential is so important in working with them. It is. I think it becomes, although there is a lot of public trust in fire and rescue service and ambulance services, in emergency response, if you steamroll in onto a community without understanding what they need, what structures they already have, you can understand how that would create some animosity or some pushback or some delay, at least in following the guidance, unless it's clear 100%. Why it's useful for them.
When we're looking at slightly longer term emergencies, for want of a better description, you and your colleagues have done various pieces of work around things like COVID as well, and COVID compliance. That would be really something interesting to discuss and unfold a little bit if we could, because the success of that application, the logic behind it, that we're not going to go into the science behind it and all that craziness, that's not for today's conversation, but like how well it was or wasn't followed, and the way in which it was given and interpreted, and by whom as well.
Absolutely.
Is really interesting, I think.
Yep. So I have to watch my words here a little bit. I think COVID it really amplified where messaging can be done effectively and ineffectively. And I think it really, although researchers have been talking about this for a long time, it really shone a light on making sure you understand the situation of the people that you're giving the guidance to, and making sure that they have the resources to follow that guidance. And so, for example, guidance such as be aware of COVID is not particularly useful. It doesn't tell you how to be aware of what you're looking out for.
It's not something physical that's going to creep around the corner and go, there it is, nobody go near it.
From behind a tree, is it?
No.
But if you can give clear guidance of actually what people need to do, what actions need to take, and why it's a good thing, that's a lot more likely to people to follow the guidance, because they can see, okay, so that's the rationale for it, that's why it's actually effective, right? It builds trust. But also, if you're giving guidance to people that they can't follow, of course you're going to get non-adherence. If you're telling people to minimize contact, but they're living in multi-generational households with elderly people, what are they going to do? Like throw some of the people in the house out on the street? It doesn't work, right? So you have to make sure that the guidance.
That was one of the things from Grenfell, where they said it was almost one of the worst examples of disability discrimination, because everyone's supposed to have personal evacuation programs, and they were trying to give instruction for people to evacuate, but those people had a close tie to someone with a disability in the building who didn't have a specific escape plan. So the reason people weren't following the compliance is not because they didn't understand it or even the rationale behind it, but their alliance, their connection, their love, whatever, to someone that it didn't apply to wasn't inclusive.
Exactly.
Both the action and the language wasn't inclusive to everyone that was important to me, not just what was important to you, and that's another reason why many people didn't evacuate, I think.
I think that you're absolutely right, and I think that importance to me, like why it's relevant for me, is really important in emergency planning and how people react. And that's why when I say about giving the guidance, explain what needs to be done and why it needs to be done, I think it helps people understand why it's important to them specifically, like what the benefit is.
You know, when we're giving, I'm going to ask you the impossible question.
Oh,
I'm going
no.
to try and get you to put a finger on the percentage of messaging. So what I mean by that is, some people think emotive language and shock tactics works, like speed kills. Hopefully that's going to change your behaviour. Maybe, maybe not. There was a great show. Actually, it wasn't very successful, but I remember a show probably even before I was born, actually. It was called Scared Straight in America, where they put young children into prisons. Young children who were already committing crimes, put them into prison, try and scare them straight. Anyway, the point I'm making is, a lot of that didn't include the why. It was just the what. Don't do this, you'll die. There wasn't any why behind it. When we're putting together our messaging, when we're looking at our guidance, what percentage of that should we be giving? And I know it's impossible. The context of why. Like, how much of it should be education? Because the brevity is the difficulty here, isn't it? I haven't got time to give you a 20-minute lecture. I can't have a half an hour seminar before we begin evacuation or compliance with the instruction the emergency services need you to do. How much time do you think we should spend on the why versus the what?
I think the why is incredibly important. And I think if you don't explain the why, then you're going to lose time because people might be looking for that why. But in terms of brevity, there are things you can say. Like, for example, a common example is the safest route is to go this way, or the fastest route is to go that way. So you can build it in quite short ways. I think the why, for me, what's so important about it isn't just that it explains to people why that particular action is important, relevant for them, especially with health-related messaging. I think the research shows that it helps build legitimacy in that particular message and helps build trust in that particular message. And that's when you're going to see people following it more. So sorry.
No, please, go on.
Time can be really, I don't need to tell you, time can be really tight in emergencies, right? But I guess it's the risk of, if you're not explaining why and people are delaying, is that time
and
for the
if they're not following you as well,
detail?
Yeah. I was thinking you want to move with purpose, but don't rush. Like, I can know it's a bit like if we're trying to move quickly, going through a jog or something. If I go too quick, I'm going to lose you altogether, and then you're just lost, and then you're scared, and then you're stuck. You know what I mean? But I do need to move with purpose, but I need to move at a pace of communication that's going to keep you understanding what we're doing, understanding what needs to happen. Like you say, the quick, immediate drop shock tactic was, I didn't know what was happening before, I don't know what's happening now, and I've actually just got more scared.
Yeah, I think that, just going back to what you were saying about like the scare messaging as well, it's not my particular area, but I don't think it's that effective, because it's one thing to say something is bad, but why? If you can explain why something is negative, why something is bad, it helps people make informed decisions.
It's the same thing with like cancerous lungs on a cigarette packet. It's the same with other things. It doesn't mean anything. It's void of even though we could follow the logic path through in our heads, it's almost too salacious. It doesn't motivate you to action, I don't think.
Yeah.
It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behaviour, firefighter health, cancer risks, instant debriefs, and so much more. a growing collection of valuable resources to help you learn and grow. So by joining the Patreon for just £3, you'll unlock everything we've ever created, alongside discounts on merch, your support in whatever way, dropping it in the WhatsApp group, sharing it on the local newsletter, whatever it is. It's incredibly valuable and we really do support it, and we need it to make it a long-lasting resource, that legacy resource we always talk about for first responders, firefighters, and everybody everywhere who's ever been interested in joining the fire service or who absolutely loves the job. Now, if you're already supporting something, as many people do, it's totally cool. You can still access the podcast for free, and you'll always be able to access all the new episodes for free, but we're asking for your help to make this sustainable. And if you want to do something free, follow us on our YouTube, subscribe to it, rate us on Spotify, whatever platform you listen to, and we want to keep growing, we want to keep sharing the insights, and we want to keep showcasing the incredible work happening in our community and our sector. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Thank you for supporting us. We'll see you on the other side.
What motivates you to action? Oh, sorry, my chair's squeaking over there.
That's okay.
I think what motivates action is perceived risk to self. So how relevant you think this particular risk is to yourself, right? Do I actually need to act? Understanding why a particular action is needed. So, okay, so they're asking me to do this because of this important thing. Understanding how to perform that action, because it's one thing knowing that you need to do something, but knowing how to do it is different. They're really important. Beyond that, I think it's important to keep up communication where possible. So to give people updates about what's happening in real time, helping to build that trust. I think it's trust in them they're listening to you, you're building up that repertoire throughout the emergency. So that doesn't really go back to your example of lungs on packets of cigarettes, but just in terms of important communication principles, for me, I'm like, this is what we need to be focusing on.
In your in the results of one of the studies I was looking at from yourself earlier, it spoke about sharing and validating information.
Yes.
I know that for some people that may sound obvious, but I try and cover the spectrum for everyone so that they don't get lost in the language. Why is that an important factor?
In emergencies, when people aren't sure what's happening, and I'm focusing specifically on when they're not sure what's happening, if something is actually a threat, if a fire alarm is real or not. When I interviewed, again, this is going back to residents of high-rise residential buildings, when I was speaking to them, they often reported that in a previous emergency, and if an emergency happened again, fire emergency specifically, if they weren't sure if something was real or what was going on, they would seek out information from others. So they would, go out the door, see if the other neighbours were looking around, and they would talk about what was happening. And so they would share their ideas and see what the others were saying. So there was this kind of ongoing process of consensus making, of decision making. And actually, I was speaking to a colleague just last week at a conference. They were telling me a fire alarm went off at 4 a.m. in their building, and this exact thing happened. And then another colleague, we were having coffee, said, "Oh yeah, I was in the same hotel," and they said the same thing had happened with them. Right? It just happens. Yeah. So it's that people are sharing information and they're checking it with the others. It's like, do you believe this too? Is this what we think?
People don't just run out of the building. They're poking their head into the corridor to see if anybody else is going.
They're looking on social media as well, like on the WhatsApp group, seeing what other people are doing, because they're trying to work out what's going on, and importantly, how to respond, what the best way to respond is. And people will talk with each other and they'll kind of share their views, they'll listen to the other person's perspective and decide what to do. Whether it's, okay, let's go down the staircase together, or do we just wait and see if the fire alarm stops?
Before we came on today, you were talking about a couple of great sort of resources out there that, again, are kind of collective places for people to go and seek some guidance. I know you mentioned a few organisations that might be useful just to go through now around where we can seek perhaps best practices on how we communicate and what kind of guidance is available on that.
There are quite a few sources of guidance for communicating with the public, specifically for first responder organisations, so for emergency services. So when I was starting the project I'm currently working on, I did a kind of deep dive into, okay, so what guidance are first responders given about communicating with the public? And actually the there isn't that much, but where there is guidance is really interesting. So there's...
I think people just assume we're going to do it really well and we know what we're doing.
Well,
it's very, very... There's a lot of isms and a lot of services do a lot of things very differently. It's very strange.
You're absolutely right. I also, in line with this, actually just after, I interviewed fire and rescue services and ambulance services, and one of my questions was, what guidance do you get? What training do you get? Or am I missing the documentation, right? Is it like hidden away in a handbook somewhere? And very little. Like you might have media training as you go up the ranks, right? But it's not really.
We have it with community safety as well, with the greatest respect. And a lot of services will be shaking their heads and nodding as I say this. Like we go into homes and provide home fire safety guidance and stuff like that. We literally, in a lot of services, look at the same booklet that we are giving to the resident. And we just interpret it and talk about it. There's no like base level training about safety in the home for us, for fire. It's just crazy sometimes.
I find it really concerning because when I talk about, pressing challenges, what the firefighters and ambulance workers wanted to get out of this project, they were saying, more and more they're kind of wrangling with this concept of how to work with the public, how to make use of the public, and this public want to help. But they don't really get guidance on it, and they'd love to know what kind of phrases are most useful, especially in... Do
you know what? And I know you're going to take us through, but do you know what I think would be so useful for that? In fact, two things. One, I'll pause and just acknowledge that there are many community safety educators specifically employed because they are very well trained, but it used to just be firefighters doing them all. So just for people that are going, you're joking, I've done loads of training. Yeah, well, there's specific educators. Anyway, that guidance aspect. Marketing and the use of language and how to drive action as a whole industry in itself. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like that siloed aspect of how we work, we could learn so much from other sectors about how to use different language in a different way to get the result you're looking for. Because that's basically what sales and marketing and advertising is sometimes, isn't it? Or most of the time.
It's one of the reasons I'm doing the experiments I'm doing at the moment, because I'm trying to work out, if we're altering the phrasing, what effect is it having? But you're absolutely right. And a lot of the I'll call it training for communicating with the public is learned on the job, or it's through mentorship. But in saying that, I looked through a bunch of different resources, including like the NFCC National Operational Guidance, Cabinet Office Emergency Planning College. They've got reports about this. There's the Government Communication Service, the Crisis Communication, a Behavioural Approach. And I just collated, and forgive me, I'm actually reading off bullet points here for full disclosure. There was a bunch of points that kind of kept coming up across this different guidance. I thought some of it is really interesting and matches up with the kind of evidence on what's useful information to give in an emergency. So, for example, being clear, being timely and accurate, so giving people information when you can, ensuring it's accurate, telling the public what's known or not known or uncertain, just so they're very aware, and telling them when there'll be updates, for example, all really, really important. Explaining what actions have been taken, and importantly, why, what the public should do, and why. I keep going back to this why. All of this is grand. There are some things I was like, well, that's quite vague, and what does it mean? So for some, it's like ensure leadership is strong, take control of the situation. And I thought, well, who's the leader in this particular context? Talking to firefighters particularly, they'll say if you come across too strong, if you're abrupt, you get backlash. And that also actually does come up in the guidance, to be fair. This idea of taking control of the situation. If you've had a situation where the public have had to organise response themselves, for whatever reason, there's been a delay in getting there, and then you steamroll in and you're too strong, you can see how that could cause backlash, right?
Yeah. It's almost like we were doing something good anyway. What we're doing was kind of working.
Yeah.
And you just bouldered right in here.
Exactly. I think building up relations and communication there is so important. Two things that really struck me, though. So there was that idea actually of it can cause psychological reactions. Backlash did come up. But there was one line that was use trusted sources and messengers, use in-group leaders to deliver key messages. And I love that, but it did make me think, well, who is this credible source? Who is the in-group? Because as we were saying earlier, we're not always sure exactly who that would be. That's about understanding who the community is, who the community leaders are, who's influential, who's going to be trusted in the emergency services, for example. My favourite line, my absolute favourite line that I came across was, develop guidance and support arrangements to effectively communicate with people. And I was like, that's very vague, but that's what I'm trying to do in my research, so I'll take it.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drill Book, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, knots and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, but you're right, like showing people, and again, you said about frequency. So the COVID thing, to be fair to them, I don't know, just from my personal interpretation, this was what was good. They were like, this is what we know now. We're going to be back again in 4 hours. And this is what we know. This is what we're going to tell you next time. We're going to give you an update then. It was that. And we do it with Jessup, Joint Emergency Services Interoperability. It's like we've shared information, situational awareness. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is what we're definitely agreeing not to do. We're going to meet it back here in 3 hours' time, and this is going to be our method of communication or something like that. That is what I see as strong leadership. And also, like you say, shared situational awareness is a term we use a lot in the emergency services, but that actually applies to everyone. That applies to the general public. That situational awareness about what is being done, what efforts, because you can't see them right now, these are the efforts that are being done. This is what we're doing on your behalf or in your best interests. You just can't see it right now. And this is when we're going to give you the next update, or this is the success we hope to have out of it, and this is the role we want you to play within it.
There's so much guidance. When I was looking for this guidance about communicating with the public, what kept coming up again and again was communication between different responder agencies, not with the public. And actually quite a lot of the principles that are there for that kind of interoperability, is that what it's called?
That's the one.
The communication between the different emergency services, that, saying what you know, what you don't know, when you'll provide updates, that transparency. I want that trust to be applied to the public as well when communicating with the public.
That's something that regularly gets missed, in all honesty. And actually, we've gotten a lot better at it. And some of the management courses I've been on in the last 10 months has been a lot better about when we're dealing with major incidents, having that consideration and involving our organization's communications team so that they can liaise with each other and agree a shared message. Because the worst thing you want is the police saying one thing, the NHS saying another, and the fire service saying another. Because these are all theoretically trusted organizations, and I don't know what's really happening. You're all giving me, don't you all work for the government? Why is this a mixed message? And it would never been out of malice, but it can be very disorientating and incongruent for the public.
It just undermines the legitimacy, right?
Yeah.
One of the kind of good principles for communication is, or two of them is, give the communication over multiple modes, different mediums of giving the communication to people's different ways of giving the communication, whether that is through signage, through verbal instructions, whether it is through multiple information sources that are all verbal. But keep it consistent, so you're not giving different information coming from different people, because that just creates issues, because then people are like, well, who should I be listening to? It just undermines the trust now.
You know what I was thinking about earlier, and it's one really tiny micro example, and people roll their eyes when I go down these rabbit holes, probably, I'm sure, but Did you ever hear the communication fable almost about the horses in the field and the kids on the school bus?
No. Oh, yes, you told me it, and I feel like everyone should hear this.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
Oh,
Everyone should
we had
hear
a chat
this.
before, didn't we? It was so great. So it was kids getting dropped off in the countryside where their school stop was, and when they get off or they're waiting to go on the bus, there's a field full of horses. And they would be giving them stuff out of their lunchbox. They'd be giving them a bit of chocolate. They'd be giving them a slice of pizza, half a sandwich, and all this sort of stuff. And the farmer was absolutely furious. And he's like, they're going to make my horses really sick. I'm worried they're going to kill them. So he was putting signs up, never feed the horses. People feeding the horses will be prosecuted. And every day he'd come back and there's just more and more wrappers there. And there's more stuff. And he could see that they'd been feeding the horses. And he couldn't find a way to get past it. And one of his friends, supposedly in this fable, says to him, empower them with guidance and the resources to be able to do the right thing, remove resistance to the correct behavior effectively. And the way he managed to change it all was he put, I think, a bucket of carrots, and he'd go and fill it up every single day. And he put a sign saying, my name's so-and-so, or the names of the horses. Our names are this, this, and this. We love carrots. If you'd like to feed us, they're absolutely our favorites. And bang, overnight, no wrappers, no chocolate. The horses weren't getting fat off carrots or anything like that. But it was just that aspect. And there was another great one I heard about a beggar on the street and the success they get and how many tips they make and stuff like this. And versus the, I'm starving, I'm dying, I've got 20 kids, my dog's got syphilis and it needs food or whatever. It was, if you've already been charitable to one person today, then please remember me next time. And that sign got so much more because it was just a different, it was just a different level of communication. And when I heard that horse story, I just thought, help people make the right decisions. Acknowledge the desire. The desire is they want to feed a horse, they want to do something. The what isn't bad, it's the how that you don't like. Do you know what I mean? They're feeding them the wrong thing. Empower them, educate them, make them part of the solution, and you'll get the desired behaviour.
Give people the resources. I think it's really key there.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And but the horse was delighted.
I know it seems a facetious, silly little example, but really, we are just big kids, in the grand scheme of things. I know we're all very, very serious about the things that we're dealing with and the consequences of getting them wrong. We've seen them all over the news, and we never want to see big sports stadiums without people being able to evacuate or people stuck in buildings and they can't get out, because emergency services operators showing up are trying to have a safe resolution to this. And I think the work that you do and the studies that you participate in are so valuable. We're going to put a link to your LinkedIn and to some of the other evidence that people can go and take a look at. I'm conscious of time, but is there any aspects that you'd love to cover before we finish? Is there anything you'd love to leave in the listener's mind?
I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me on. I think if I could give some key messages, it's trust the public. They're incredibly resilient. Tell them what's going on, what they need to do, why they need to do it. Always pay attention to who's going to be that trusted messenger. Trust is so central. And I'm really glad to see that trust in the public, that kind of focus on communication is becoming seen as increasingly important. And I'm really excited to see where this research area goes in the next 5 to 10 years, because I think it's gaining momentum very quickly.
And thanks so much for your time. I would sincerely love to have you back on in maybe 6 months' time to see what more adventures you've got to as you speak to more and more people and help the knuckle draggers of the world like me have the right methods of communication to hopefully help people in the way that we want to. Really appreciate it. But
it's two-way. Like, I've learned so much from talking to firefighters and ambulance services. I learned so much from them. And so having that dialogue, I think to me, sort of sits in my isolated office sometimes. Hearing from people who've got the experience on the ground, it's been so valuable. So I would love this dialogue to continue.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognise, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.